Sorry, I got distracted. Sorry, I got distracted. There's a big soccer game on here, our football game.
Yes,
being in
US
London
versus Iran is here soon. So
yeah, it's and there's a pub underneath me in the hotel. So
oh, nice.
It's the topic tonight. So I know that Roger, for example, is on with us, and I know that he'll be looking at escaping at some point. But I'm absolutely delighted to have everybody here. This is an exciting session for us because it's really an overview of each one of these sessions can turn into a full session for your schools and for the tech leaders and for the people in the school. So what I've done with this evening is try to bring in some of our industry experts, and they will actually be presenting and asking questions. And then at the end of each session, if everyone will use the chat and actually just post for me if you'd like to follow up with the individual guest speakers, or if you want more information on that topic. And that way, each time you'll be able to handle that. And I suppose I should say, Global Ed and each of the individual speakers and everybody involved and NCPSA, no one has a financial relationship with any of the experts. I just happen to know that they're experts in the field. So there's no commercial being played here or anything else. All right. So this is purely, I've invited friends and family guests. By family, I mean friends of NCPSA, friends of mine that I've met through fabulous workshops and conferences, and they've agreed to give their time to really work with us for this workshop. So exciting stuff ahead of us. With that, let me just do a quick introduction, if I can. One of our guest speakers this evening. Well, David, you're on tomorrow, right? I think everyone knows Dr. David Reed. David, would you introduce yourself and give 30 seconds on what your topic's going to be and how it's of benefit for us?
Hi, David Reed. I'm in Mesa, Arizona, coming from Mesa, and Trina has asked me to speak in session 5 on the difference between the back end and the front end of an online school. So basically, that'll be the context, so to speak. And I'm just happy to be here to see all of you again.
Thanks so much, David. The next one, as I scroll across, is Dr. Bryan Setzer. Bryan, I think you're new to the NCPSA group, but I know that Dr. Petrie has invited you to speak and share some of the work you're doing with us at the annual conference in January. So delighted to have you here. And I believe you're on for 2 sessions.
That's correct, Trina. Thanks for the invite and glad to meet all of you. Excited to share a little bit about our work regarding digital transformation. We'll be talking not only about the IT issues around it, and opportunities, but also how to make sure the experiences are really outstanding for users across blended and online learning. So excited to share with everyone and learn from you as well.
Thank you so much, Bryan. Roger Clark. Roger is with us, probably the most technical of all of the groups, and certainly will be able to do some things for your CTOs. Roger, a quick overview and introduction.
Thanks very much, Trina. So Roger Clark from the UK, with an outfit called Appliances, who have been helping schools with connectivity challenges for the last 20 years. And we're finding that the kinds of low-cost solutions that we've been propounding have become de rigueur across the world, partly as a result of the pandemic, but as countries aim to transform education with ICT-enabled e-learning, getting connectivity right has turned out to be absolutely critical. And we're going to share some insights with you on how that's going.
Thank you very much. Let me see who else is on my list of presenters. I think that's it for now. Some of the others will be joining us. Clay, do you want to have everybody introduced, or should we just hop right into the presentations?
I would just go right into the presentations.
All right, sounds good. So this evening, our goal is our goal is actually to look at how do we as evaluators or as accreditors or as leaders of groups of organizations and school entities, how do we actually recognize, establish, and evaluate high quality distance learning programs or the use of technology in our brick and mortar buildings. So we're really hoping to look at instructional technology, the use of instructional technology, and distance learning protocols. So session 1 is simply the introduction. I'm going to highlight for you, we're going to look at everything from how to look at the management teams, how to understand the skill sets needed, quite different from working in a brick and mortar school completely. And, unfortunately, sometimes we just kind of throw the vice principal or the assistant head in and say, hey, you run this, or the IT director, and we say, hey, this is on you, without any really understanding of all the things that are necessary in standing up some of these online programs. The next session, of course, is looking at standards for teaching, standards for content and instructional design. We have a session looking at the selection of technology and tools to support the development of really an ecosystem that's necessary for running blended learning and those programs, and really an introduction to those of you who are not IT experts to the terminology and to some of the things that you should be looking for. Then we'll look at how to evaluate the technology and the support, understanding what internet and capacity and cybersecurity and all these things, what they really entail, and how the FCC and some of these protocols and services should be evaluated and how you should look at those. Then we'll roll into some of the observations and considerations about the back end of the house versus the front end. And believe it or not, there are two separate worlds, and all the services that you need in a brick and mortar school. You actually need not only that, but more if you're going to run in the virtual world. And there are things that as an evaluator, you should be looking for. And we're going to help. We hope we're going to help you with some of these sessions. In session 6, we'll look at the staffing models, looking at scheduling, supporting students, supporting the educational program, looking for how we support the community at large, looking for parental support and supporting our teachers and some of those things. Then we'll look at the how to understand assessment and data in online programs, and how to look at all the different tools and resources, benchmarking, standardized testing, progress monitoring, and so on in those online or blended learning environments. And then the final session is really looking at policies, governance, is it part of the school? Is it a separate school? Does it need accreditation? Does it not? Does it need its own advisory board? Looking at all of these things, and there are no judgments, there are no final you must do this, but we're simply here today and over the next 2 days to help you understand all of the things you should be looking for. And again, before we get started, and I think Bryan's up first, Dr. Setzer, we want to make sure that you understand, use the chat. I will be monitoring the chat session throughout. I've asked each of our participants to actually share with us about 20-25 minutes, and then they're open for questions. Please use the time to ask the questions. I have cut my session short because Bryan's coming in, my first one. I will follow up at the end with anything that anybody's missing or any questions that you need. So Bryan, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I believe you're going to do 2 full sessions. We'll pause for questions in between each of those. So Dr. Setzer, if you will take over and you can begin at this point in time. Thanks.
Thanks, Trina, and thanks everybody for your attention. I'm going to share on the screen. Trina, if you can give me access, I'll bring it up. I think I need just the screen share permission, and then we'll be good to go.
Sorry, Clay, can you do that?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thumbs up if everyone can kind of see the slide deck and orient yourself. I'm going to just breeze through a few slides and approaches, and also leave some time for the dialogue, which is always rich around digital transformation in general. Also, I really appreciate Trina rearranging schedule so I could see the US play at 2 p.m. today, Eastern time, in the World Cup. My boys are excited about that, and we're trying to get ready. But I want to talk to you a little bit about this ongoing notion of digital transformation and how we think about that at our firm. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit about our work, talk about some of the big ideas for digital transformation when you're selecting tools and platforms and technologies, and also when you're thinking about your current ecosystem or the one that you desire. How do you navigate that chasm? I'll show you some candy store examples, and what I mean by that is hopefully things that spark your curiosity and inquiry, and you can look at and say, I understand sort of the challenge or the opportunity. I understand where this organization is currently and what it's trying to become and go and do regarding digital transformation and ecosystem work. And then I'll share with you some playbooks that we use. I've given this entire deck to Trina. She'll send it out afterwards. You can have access to the resources and also the links in it, and hopefully it's beneficial to you. So we begin by talking about what I decided to do in 2020. I chose to launch a business during an unprecedented global pandemic, and it was a really good call. People were trying to figure out their future of learning and work at scale. They were trying to either go online the first time, which a lot of people experienced as emergency remote online work or blended work. Some people already had digital transformation going on, and they were trying to figure it out now in a much deeper way. And then a lot of the innovators that we encountered were trying to clap their hands and say, finally, the world is going to be radically different, and we know it. How can we make that pivot or shift? So over the past 3 years, we've worked in a lot of spaces. We have K-12 clients. We have higher ed clients, what I would consider clients who support education, and then workforce clients. And lots of people are asking very similar questions, and some folks are asking groundbreaking ones and new ones that they want to explore when it comes to digital transformation. So I thought for the purpose of our call today, we could wrestle with some of these questions that I've seen, not only since the pandemic, but over the course of my career. Lots of people ask me when it comes to tech tools and platforms, Bryan, what do I build? What do I buy? Or what do I borrow? And what they mean by that is, should we custom build or white label or stand something up in technology or from a platform perspective that is original and we own the IP and we work out all the kinks in that and we try to launch a product or a service or both? Some folks say, look, we've already got some things that are interesting in how we think about education or training. We'd just like to, buy something that's going to work for us. And we have a legacy system or a native technology solution now. We got to get into something new, but how do we do that? And then a lot of folks will just say, you mean to tell me there's a platform or a tool out there that I can just, put some of my strategy and implementation in and I can license it or borrow it for a time? And I think lots of people are vacillating in those three questions a lot in our industry. I think folks wonder about staying or leaving their Frankenstein technology ecosystem. And what I mean by that is they may have a legacy database or an old CRM, or they may have something that they've patched together with Band-Aid and gum. And now they're learning that that system does not have a lot of modern integrations, or there's so much data they've put into it that they have trouble getting out or sort of defragmenting their system. That question pops up a lot. And then how do I manage change for now, next, and future iterations of my transformation strategy? For all of the talk about learning management systems like Blackboard, the reality is people love the devil they know. And if any of you are Blackboard zealots, just know that I've experienced it at many levels. And the common question would always be, well, what version are you in? And what are the capabilities? What are the requirements? What are the functionality, the cost of that, if you want to scale it? So you look at the LMS market and you say, well, what if I've made a choice to offer something or deliver something in that way? And what if I've always been a Blackboard or Canvas or Moodle user? What can I do to incorporate new LTI integrations? What can I do to think about offering it in different ways to my customers and my consumers? And then lots of people are moving out of that kind of thinking, and they're talking about, white labeling a unified portal, or they're thinking about using a standard software to append to something like Google or Teams or Slack. And so when we say Frankenstein, we're at an interesting place in the space where lots of people are making some of these decisions about where they want to head. I think finally, how do I bring it all together? How do I configure technology, talent, and tech partnerships in certain ways where I can get the most value with what I have and improve that system in order to innovate towards the system I need? And that's really our challenge, right? How do we improve the system we have to innovate to the system we need? So I said I would provide a few examples to some of these questions. And what I'll do is make sure to drop into the chat, these questions so you can kind of track them as we go through some of the candy store examples. And then we'll have a chance to kind of stop and talk. So this past year, North Carolina was given $8 million to launch high touch and high tech pathways for high school students. Someone had done a study that even though North Carolina had 10 million in their population, only about 800,000 of those had a degree or a credential. So it was set in motion, not only in North Carolina, but also in Texas with their Project 2036 work, to close that gap, to try and get 2 million people with a credential or a degree by 2036. 26 other states in the US have similar legislation on the books. Everybody's trying to bundle and unbundle digital content at the same time, to bundle and unbundle data intelligence at the same time, and to think about how they offer choice and flexibility among their solutions. So one of the first things we did was talk about how we might offer this to students like Gloria. Would her experience be mobile? Would she have experiences in the metaverse? Would she have experiences on LMS? How would we think about giving Gloria a mobile passport to her future? And so North Carolina identified 5 pathways to start. We have been designing those pathways based on the job demand in North Carolina and the Southeast. They are pathways like artificial intelligence and machine learning, pathways like software development, pathways like UX and UI, pathways like esports and game development, and pathways that include things like cybersecurity. So as we've been designing this, the question has been, where is it offered? What would the ecosystem look like? How much custom development is required? Now, you may not know this stat, but 70% of K-12 schools in North Carolina are on Canvas, the learning management system. 12 of the 17 higher ed institutions are on Canvas. Over the last 2 years, Canvas has acquired Badger, Instructure, Portfolium, different tools to create an end-to-end user experience for students who want to learn formally and informally. So our task is to think about how to look at this from an integrative perspective across the North Carolina school districts. We have chosen 17. We are standing up some early experiences in Canvas that is appended to a mobile instance that's appended to their Portfolium tool, and also the Badger tool to give them real digital transcripts that interface with any employer, interface with any higher ed institution. A granular example of this is Cumberland County students in North Carolina take Sec Dev Ops in cybersecurity as an 11th and 12th grade student. They get an industry-ready credential to go to college or career. If they choose career, they're instantly employable. And if they choose college, they have a partnership with Fayetteville State, an HBCU, that translates and coordinates that credit acquisition to higher ed. So I share that example to say there are lots of technology tools and challenges in this project, whether we wanted to do a unified portal, whether we wanted to begin with Canvas, whether we wanted to look at LTI3 integrations to bring platforms like ServiceNow into that work, and to think about how all that moves for a student on the front end and moves for educators and administrators on the back end. What data comes in, what data is going out, how do we help people make decisions on what they're learning around these credential tracks? Now, when we think about a second example of the candy store, I don't know if you've previewed the platform Class, but Class looked at everything that Zoom was doing over the last 3 years, experiences that Zoom was having in terms of user experience, integration, making sure that they embedded tools into the Zoom environment. So over the last 3 or 4 months, you might have noticed on your Zoom accounts, if you go to the 3-dot-more tab, you've got some apps in there. You've got some things that you can add to your Zoom user experience. What Class was interested in doing was looking at the asynchronous experience and the synchronous experience and making it seamless, making it what we should be calling it all along, which is learning, and not trying to separate it and configure it or put it in different walls. So Setzer Group has a statewide contract with the Louisiana Community College and Technical System. They are a Canvas user, but we are helping them integrate the synchronous LTI integrations with Class. Class has metadata, and so does Canvas. And both of that pulls back to a dashboard where the leadership at Louisiana can see engagement time. They can see how students are working in breakout rooms. They can incentivize that by badges from student engagement pieces, how they're participating at meta levels around class discussions, and also how they're utilizing the Class tool. So they took a lot of what was happening in Zoom and really changed the experience so that teachers could monitor 4 breakout rooms at once, see what technologies were being embedded, and gain user data on the back end. Setzer Group is participating in a lot of the change management and training around how instructors will use that tool. As we look at work for accessibility, and we talk a little bit about how this is working in the area of deaf education, Gallaudet and the K-12 version in the states of the Laurent Clair Center, both have accessibility designs and user integrations that are really unique around ASL. They also have a social media strategy that needs to be everything from closed caption to interpreter-led to making sure that students and users can have experiences around the web that promote the highest level of accessibility. So our charge in this was to help Gallaudet think through this from a digital transformation strategy, but also to help them think through it from a leadership strategy level. So when I was asked to speak by Trina, and I was thinking about how to make sense of some of these technology tools, some of these environments, some of the ways that we think about deploying them in blended and online learning, a couple of things I want to leave you with before we get to questions. I'm not a fan of the term change management in isolation. I really believe that accreditors, organizations that are looking at ecosystems, resources, how they're thinking about talent and time, need to practice change leadership. It's important when you're beginning a digital transformation strategy to communicate frequently, to make sure to collaborate frequently, and to really have commitments of how people want to experience the process and how they want to be involved. Now, we draw on some of the best change management in the space, from Cotter to ADKAR to SCARF, backed by neuroscience and how people learn. But it's really the change leadership piece that begins to show up digitally. When you are beginning to market or use technologies to think about how you might show up in the space, a lot of time is spent on microsites and where folks need to be communicated to or story told for. So not only are you tracking some of the system tools that you're using, but you also need a communication strategy. We work with the HBCU Winston-Salem State, and we helped Gallaudet and Claire reopen during COVID. It's really important in these leadership practices to understand what users are doing on these microsites, where they're gaining information, what kind of analytics you have, even from a Google Analytics standpoint or a paid analytics version on the back end. So how are people accessing information? Is it pithy? Is it timely? Is it on a cadence? How can they begin to understand what digital transformation practice you're rolling out? When we think about nudges and the science behind nudges and filtering various technologies, it's really important for us at Setzer Group to bundle and unbundle content on a weekly basis. In addition to what Trina will share with you in this deck, you can go to our website and for free access all of our back-end communications going back 3 years on how we think about truths in the industry, tools in the industry, and clients and partners who are doing great work. It's all there for free. So if you follow a newsletter like this, it gives you a pithy way to get smarter and better faster. One of the recommendations I would make as a part of this expert series is that you begin to communicate frequently and celebrate the work of others to build those natural networked improvement communities where you can quickly learn what folks are doing and then apply that in real time in your industry. I mentioned Gallaudet before. They're highly visual. They're not going to write a big newsletter as much as they're going to do pithy video blogging, video casting with interpreters. Lots of reasons behind that. Good EDUCAUSE research on 3 minutes or less, but also making sure that it's familiar and personal for the user experience. Now, when we take that to the place of project management, this is where it all falls down, right? Everybody's got great designs, everybody has good momentum, and then somebody's not monitoring or making sure that the work streams are actually happening. So we spent a lot of time thinking about all the technology tools in the space, from Asana to Monday.com to Teams to Slack. And one of the practices we encourage with our clients, which you'll get a video leave behind from Trina and also a blank template like the one you're looking at here where you can customize, is where is the project? How are you celebrating others in a digital transformation? What are the next steps? What are the key decisions and risks? And what are the milestones and work streams? Digitizing this in dashboards, whether you're using Monday.com, whether you're using Asana, is super easy. But the nudges around how people behave on two of the most prominent technologies to date, Slack and MS Teams, how are they collaborating in those two technologies as they're building their transformation strategy? Those are all things that we think deeply about at Setzer Group and think about from speaking to groups like this on looking at digital transformation. So I'm going to conclude by just showing you a pane view of the slides that I used today. If you want to, double click or ask a question on anything, I'm certainly available for that. But my purpose and task today was really to show you some of the components of how we think about assessing and advising where clients are on digital transformation and tool selection, platform selection, how they're thinking about user experiences and creating them and making them better. And then once we advise that, we often build it with them in their context, in their branding, with the tools they already have or the ones they would like to bring on. And then finally, they often work with us to stay around and help on the business model side, because you have to sustain all this. You have to make sure that it's workable within their current system, and you have to make sure that they're building for scale at the same time. So I'll pause there, Trina, and any questions in the chat, happy to take them or verbally.
Thanks, Brian. First of all, I want to thank you for this overview. I mean, it's tremendous because I think what you've probably done with most of us is just said, oh my gosh, I don't even know these terms. I don't know these tools. I don't know any of this. And what it does is it opens up, much more conversation. As you were speaking, I started putting some questions into the chat, simply asking from the group. I don't want to call on people because that's pressure, right? No one wants that pressure, but I do want some volunteers, as an accreditor. Do you know enough about this? Do you have ways to support your schools who are going through this digital transformation? Do you know more than everybody? We've got a one-to-one, laptop system. Are you aware that there are so many changes in education that are driving our schools, or have you just in your policies and in your school evaluations, have you just started looking at well, everybody's got a laptop and we've got internet access, is that how deep you go? Or are you understanding, and my goal through these workshops is helping you as leaders of organizations to really understand that so much of how the learner is now learning using these platforms and systems has changed. The data access has changed. Our ability to drive high quality instruction has changed. And so even though we'll be doing work with teachers and training for educators, it's really, really critical that you who are at the top also understand in guiding and leading and in policy and so on, what's going on and how this is no longer school or user experience as it has been. We're in a new era, and it's not just throwing a laptop or an iPad. There's so much more that has changed. So my question is, do we need more in-depth work on this? Do you think your heads are aware of this? Are you seeing the heads? Are you hearing them talking in this new language? Because what I'm hearing here is that our public schools, in some of the work that Bryan's doing in North Carolina, or in other areas, our public schools and our university systems are now driving some of this transformative work. The other thing is, is how do we evaluate those resources? Do you need some more support? I'll start working and delivering some of that support for you through the Education Tech Committee. Our commission can start to provide some resources for you that may be helpful. And then one of the big things that Bryan hit on for me that was a pop out was really understanding the fact that now we have far more data being gathered on the user. We know so many more things besides what the teacher is grading. How are we using that data? Do you know how to assess the fact that they are using it? And we'll lead into the issue of cybersecurity in another session before we close out today. So from a school improvement process, from a school evaluation process, I'm going to open it up now to everyone else. In this new era of digital transformation, what do you know? What do you need to know? And what would you like to know moving forward? And are there gaps? Is this all new? Let's get some response for Bryan. Just feel free to unmute yourselves so I don't have to call on somebody.
I'm going to chime right in and say that I feel overwhelmed by everything I've seen. I'm finding what I don't know and didn't know to know. So I think that for the future, we're going to need like a platform that we could launch in the commission where we can get more resources for what we need to know and what we need to. I don't even know who to ask. So now I know I'm going to call Bryan all the time. So.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to start popping on names because I know what I don't know, and I know what many of us don't know. So I'm going to just pick on Steve Lindquist. There you go. I'm picking up names at this point. Steve, and then Susan, you're on deck. You'll be next up.
All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. I'm having some tech issues, so well, hopefully it'll still work out. I think the conversation that Bryan started with those 4 points, the one I'm hearing from all of our school heads is that point number 3 on making changes and looking at what's now, what's next, and what's future. I think in the technology world, I just had a conversation with a guy yesterday in Wisconsin looking to build an online platform at his school and talking through, do you want to be the school of record? Do you want to be the provider of curriculum? And that was a question. He's like, wow, I hadn't thought about that. I'm like, well, that's the basic question. So these are, they're at the very foundational conversations coming out of this COVID, this post-COVID world of integrating tech into their school systems. And I think our school heads don't know even the proper questions to ask, kind of like what Clay said. I don't know what I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Right. And so giving them a starting point of saying, okay, what do you want to do now? Then what's next? What's the vision? Right. And then let's talk about how you can get there and come alongside. And there's great programs out there. You don't have to build it yourself. Right. Figure out what you can do and put a little bit of resource allocation into it. Find a donor who's willing to give you some capital to put up for it in the school setting. There's many different ways to do it. So I think that question, managing change for now, next, and future, was probably my biggest takeaway.
Bryan,
So
you're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, so Trina, a couple things on Clayton's question. I dropped in the free resource to all of our e-letters and our past sort of stuff. We release those every week. One of the influences of putting that together was a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk, who I'd studied online and LinkedIn, where he was making the point to write content weekly. And then he could take that content and unbundle it and use it on social. So one of the things that a lot of private schools, a lot of private accreditors should look for when they look for a school's parent engagement strategy or communication strategy or a community strategy is, are they social and mobile? Parents want a great user experience as well. And if you're not social and mobile, they're going to look at you in ways that are very different than what they expect when they dial up an Uber, when they Google a restaurant, when they use any application. And the good news is this stuff has gotten super cheap. It is no longer hard to stand up a very brief mobile and social strategy where you can look not only high touch, but high communicative, right? Where you've got a transparent way to control the narrative around your buildings. If I was an accreditor, or if I was somebody, I've served on review teams with all kinds of accredited organizations. And if I was looking at your community engagement strategy and I didn't see social or mobile, I would have some major questions with the time that we're in. Now, on the second prompt about bullet 3 and where Steve was going, you dream big, but you start small. And then you learn, you literally outlearn everyone else. I mean, that's the lean startup strategy. So what could we look like in the next 90 days at our private school? In the next 90 days, where could we dip our toes in the water around online? Then where do we want to be by the end of this year? And where do we want to be in 3 years? Trina knows this about me, but I have a famous expression. Let's stop doing autopsies on our schools. Let's do diagnostics every 90 days. If we want our schools to be healthy, if we want schools that accreditors are visiting to be healthy, what's their engagement strategy now, next 90 days, next 6 to 12 months, future? And the good news is you can budget, you can resource for those futures, but you have to have all 3 strategies.
Okay, Susan? Or anyone else who has some questions, and then I'll pop in here.
There's
Well,
one in the chat, Trina.
Yeah, so there's a couple here. I'll just look at the one that says, what is the timeline for implementation? Is there a phasing process? And do you set up a stepping process? And, yes, as Bryan knows, I've been doing those for INACOL and for schools and organizations, launching online schools for about 20 years. I hate to say it, I'm dating myself, right? So I will set up for the heads. The purpose in this with all of you for the next few days is to identify where you have needs, and then we will set up workshops for the heads and for your IT people. We will do in-depth and we'll do strategic planning, and support any of the topics that you're interested in. We don't need everybody to come to everything, but we will make we'll make a list, and then from that we'll start a series of workshops, because you know, Clay has been really clear about wanting to be able to provide resources, training, and support and direction for all of you as a value add. So, you know, that's one of the things that I can bring to the table for you. And by bringing people like Bryan in, you know, we've worked together for 20 plus years, Bryan. I hate to say that and throw us under the bus for being old people, right? But, you know, we've been launching online schools for a very long time, and can bring you a lot of resources and a lot of training. So if that's a need, we'll certainly, we'll do that. We'll schedule that training.
Well, what I wanted to build on with that question was everything you said, Trina. And look, with a partner, with a group like this, commit to 30 days just to get smart. You know, ask the questions, have a sprint around awareness, have a sprint around, you know, having multiple sessions like this. What's great about what Trina set up here, you're going to learn from a lot of folks. Gather that knowledge in a 30-day sprint, and then chart the themes. What problems do you want to solve? What aspirations do you have? Then don't be afraid to go and try it, to build something in a 90-day MVP. And I'll give you a classic example of what we ran in during COVID. People would call us the minute they went on to COVID full-time remote, and they would say, we literally do not know how we're going to solve Wi-Fi and access issues. Well, that's a good prototype, right? Like, you can play with that. You can experiment with that in the first 90 days, get feedback, make sure that you're ready. We literally don't know how we want to increase academic rigor on one-to-one laptops. Okay, let's do a little 90-day pilot in your English classes. Let's do that online. That's what I mean by starting small, to build momentum, build capacity. And then pretty soon, what we try to do at our firm is identify those evangelists and champions at your site who can go on without us, right? Like work ourselves out of a job. Like, we want to build the capacity of 5 or 6 people that now know how to do that. So if you're not running 90-day cycles at your place on 2 or 3 things that you want to solve, then you'll always do what you've always done.
Bryan, that's really interesting to me. I mean, in the world of technology, we are so used to these sprints, or this idea of testing, iterating through it, retesting, iterating again, getting the minimal viable product, or the MVP, as you said, stood up, and running it. But it's not a process schools are used to. Schools are generally used to the cycle of, I plan and I budget in spring, I do some training in June or July, and I implement without ever having stood up a pilot or tested anything. And so getting that mindset change is really, really important as well. So that's something else that we can look at in future trainings. So I'm going to ask, if you have any more questions, pop them in here so that we can capture those. And then we'll start moving forward. Bryan, you have another session. Are we ready to get into the second topic that you have?
Well, I think
Trina.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah, if I might say something.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for me, it's really like drinking out of a fire hose right now. And I think our schools in CSF are so diverse. We're just at the beginning of talking about how much do we really want to get involved in online learning, simply because for some people it's a philosophical question. For others, it's having to have the baby steps there before we get all the other things that seem so overwhelming to us. And then also to know what kind of staff we have to have available to even understand the language that you're using. I'm just sharing with you that I guess they would have to be real baby steps for us.
And that's, you know, for me, that's such an important thing that you recognize that. right? Because very often what happened, and I'll tell you, I launched University of Miami online school 20 years ago. It's hard to believe, but we made every mistake in the book, right? So everybody jumped in. It was a mad rush. We thought we were going to save the world, and we actually ended up, it wasn't very successful at all in those early years. So just knowing that there are steps and that there needs to be a process and it needs to be analyzed. And you, like Bryan says, you don't do it all at once. You don't say, okay, I'm launching an online school like people did with COVID. Everybody just jumped in. They threw all their materials that were designed for brick and mortar buildings. They threw them into Google Classrooms, or they threw them into a learning management system. And they said, okay, I've got an online program. No, not really. You're doing work online, but that's not an online school, right? There's no quality assurance and so on there. So just knowing and being aware, I think, the approach that Bryan recommends of starting and going slowly and iterating and taking just little bites to see, understanding what are we trying to solve for is always the first question. Why do you want to go online? Not just because everybody's got an online school or it's trendy. What's it going to do for you? Do you have clientele that need it? And I think those are the kinds of questions that we begin with as we start these conversations.
I think also, Trina,
Yeah,
I think also that if Susan, good information for her, for Christian Schools of Florida and other associations in NCPSA, is that they can draw the resources of other associations in NCPSA. The Seventh-day Adventists have done light years of work in this industry and other associations that we work with, and you can draw from their knowledge. I mean, I think that's the resource that we have.
that's right. Yep. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I would go so far as to say, if you have a small organization or a limited number of schools that want to get involved, not only drawing on the resources or the knowledge, but I would highly recommend drawing on and participating in the courses being run by your colleagues. You don't have to own your own online school, right? You can use your neighbors. You can partner to share resources. There are a lot of models out there, and that's one of the things that we'll be happy to go through with you, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of information out there.
Larry?
Yeah, Trina, I think a couple of things. There are so many programs, so many LMSs, so many CMSs, so many different, and everybody's trying to push you into this product or that product. I think for most organizations that want to start an online school or start a technology program, they really should investigate companies like Bryan's company that will help them get started and stop. I've seen so many organizations that go this way and it's wrong, and then they go this way and it's wrong, and they spend so much money and so much time that if they would have spent that money on a consultant up front, they would have been much better off to begin with. At the same time, we want to be part of that resource for you at NCPSA. And Trina and myself and others have decades of experience in technology and distance education. So I do recommend that you find a consultant that you can use and get you started in a positive way, rather than making 5 mistakes before you get to the first grading period.
And actually, Larry, if I can bounce on that, use us first. We're free consultants, because we'll help you to understand some consultants, they're not all the same, right? So don't go waste your money.
Right.
We will help you find the consultant that will meet your needs and that won't gouge you, because I've wasted so much money over the years and wasted so much time and energy. So know that Larry has run and operated and run the Seventh-day Adventist online schools across multiple countries. And that was a decade worth of work, love, and frustration. So, for the Seventh-day Adventist community across, thousands of schools. And I've done the same for, CatholicVirtual.com, FranklinVirtual.com, Virtual Schools of Excellence, University of Miami, 20 years of standing these up and managing and understanding, some at a very cheap price point, some that had brick and mortar associated with them. So we also know who the players in the space are. use us as NCPSA resources. Start here, we'll understand what you're looking for. And then, we've got through our networks, people like Bryan, who are just tremendous. And, Bryan and all the speakers today were very careful about saying, look, we're not pitching our services or company. We just want people to know the extent of the work going on in the industry today, today, and what that transformation and that transformative work is. So use us to help you get to where you need to be or to where your schools need to be. You've got emails, you've got phone numbers, you've got everything you need. Your schools should begin to learn this year that we provide resources through NCPSA, through all of our commissions and committees. The goal is to support schools and to help those schools to get to where they need to be. Yep. So, Bryan, I'm going to pop you in and ask, because we could dive into this, and this could take us 20 hours, right? So if you don't mind, can we say we're coming back? We definitely need another workshop on this. We need to engage you to bring us deeper, but with the school heads and with maybe our IT directors as well. Can I ask you to flip and go into our next topic?
Sure. More than happy to help all of you in any ways that you need. I wanted to talk with you a little bit today about what Susan just referenced on how to build capacity, awareness, and to root it and anchor it in an actual private school model that we recently did over the last year. Great Hearts out of Texas is a brick and mortar classical education private school. You can get no more traditional than where they started. They absolutely believe that the classics, the canon, that's the way to teach and learn. That's their starting point. But when you connect this back to what Trina said, not only, and Larry said, not only did they use consultants and partners, they actually budgeted for it. They said, hey, every year we know we're going to need to get smarter. The world's changing. We just went through COVID. So every year we're going to use a mix of consultants, strategic partners, contractors to figure out where we want to go next. So when I first got involved with them, they were brick and mortar and they had gone online recently because of COVID. The experiences that they had with that, Susan, were both positive, negative, mixed. You know the game, what we all just experienced. And they knew coming out of it that they wanted a better version of Great Hearts Online, that they didn't want to re-experience what they just experienced. And they admitted that a lot of the challenges were theirs, like couldn't get adoption, couldn't get instructors and professors and teachers ready, couldn't solve for some access issues. So what they asked us to think about was, well, what are our options? We know that going forward in the future, we're going to need to create different ways to get classical education out if we want to have growth, if we want to have depth, what have you. And they came up with this notion called Great Hearts Civitas, where they would have revolutionary communities, both physical and online, but still with classical education as the lead-in. And as they were thinking about going online, they also were noticing this trend around micro schools, that basically more and more folks wanted to offer smaller versions of their school. Now, those of us that have been in this game a long time, this could be a summer academy. This could be a intercession. But the point was, how could they offer something that was brick and mortar, something that was online, and something that was set up more like an academy? And as they began to tease that out, they started thinking about maybe we need a walled garden between our private offering and our public offering, because we believe the public schools and public school students could benefit from a classical education. So they started thinking about regional community offerings. They started thinking about enrichment courses, And Great Hearts to date has all 4 models up and functioning some 3 years later, where we began with the work with them. And in their business model, because of where they're headed with growth, they've still got their bread and butter charters. They've still got their bread and butter physical, classical sort of, building level stuff. But where they're really expanding is giving people part of that virtual experience, that regional experience, and that micro school experience. So when we talk about readiness for where we're headed, this was one client in particular, when I think about where the private school space is, where, you're going to have more and more families because of the experience of COVID who don't want to attend your location physically, who work in remote jobs. Some of the research coming out of John Priest in Australia and in the US, Josh Burson, if you're not reading or if you're not connected on LinkedIn to Josh Burson in the US or John Priest in Australia, 2/3 of offices are not returning. People are not going back to physical spaces. So what's the evolution of the physical space? Well, if you came and visited me in RDU in Durham, you would see communities that look like Menlo Park in California. You're seeing, mobile pop-up communities. You're seeing communities where people are sharing office space. My wife works at RTI International, $1 billion nonprofit right here in the Triangle. They're not requiring people to come back to work. They're reorganizing their space for schools, for drop-in centers, for regional centers, for micro schools, for micro training environments. So the discussion is not, is physical or virtual good or bad? The discussion is a both and discussion. We should never opt for the tyranny of either or when the genius of both and is at our fingertips. Now the quote's from Grinny, but it's very applicable to what you all are experiencing. You can have your core classical private situation, and you can also offer opportunities off of it. So instead of expanding that campus physically, expand it virtually. Instead of expanding that offering into a must come to the school academy, what if you offered it as a micro event? What if you offered it as an enrichment activity or series of exercises? These 4 choices don't have to be all at once for you. We phased them in over time with Great Hearts, but they are applicable to the presentation today because each one of them required a digital strategy. Each one of them required resources and budgets to begin thinking about how they were going to augment their services and think about it differently. So I shared this one, Trina, because I thought it would be less of a presentation, more of a discussion point of, hey, no matter where you are in your current state, designing for next and future does not have to compromise your values, your content, your integrity. What it does have to do, though, is be in different delivery methods that all of us expect in a modern age.
Bryan, I love this, and I'll start this conversation, I think, and I'm hoping everybody else engages as well. What's really interesting for me is when I look at the stats, my daughter works in Deloitte and her building is in the Rockefeller Plaza. And they fly her, she's in HR, and they fly her every week to a different state. She's in Chicago, she's in Miami, she's flying everywhere. But she hasn't been back in the building because in New York City, only 8% of the employees have gone back to the buildings. Now, apart from what that's doing to the real estate, what it does and what it says to me is the world of work has changed significantly. And if the world of work has changed so significantly, are we doing students a disservice? And I put that question in there. If we do not understand that the future of work and the world that they are entering when they leave us, whether through college, again, the college virtual numbers are huge, virtual campuses, because now kids are able to work online, they're able to go and take their online classes. What are we sending kids into for the world of work or the world of college? And if we haven't prepared them for, go back to your original list, for communicating online, for working online, for learning online, for managing their time, for all of those skill sets. If we've not taught them how to collaborate, how to communicate, how to do all these things in an online environment at any point, to do it effectively, not just open the laptop and work or do a Zoom session, but to actually really do that, and then to be able to analyze themselves and really to be able to synthesize information and all of those skill sets, are we doing them a disservice? And so if you think about that and you think about the answer, the question then is, looking back at this example of someone who is a classical education, looking at new models, I think this is a topic we all have to study. I'm going to throw it over to David. David, if you don't mind, I know that you have a lot of experience as well with alternative groups, alternative education, alternative centers, and micro schools. So maybe you can, if you have any comment, and then we'll open it to questions for Bryan.
I'm not seeing David. Where is David online?
Did I lose him? Let me see. Oh, I may have lost him.
He may have dropped off.
Sorry, the soccer started and I knew I was going to be competing with soccer once I saw the matches were on. Oh my Lord. Okay. So anyone else with comments on this for Bryan? Any questions, anything else on this?
The Great Heart Civitas, although we don't have a lot of schools that are classical, I still think having these kinds of options as beginning steps might really work for us. That seems, Bryan, to me to be more encouraging.
Yeah.
So thank you for showing me that.
You bet. And, Trina, Larry, others on the call, I would say that when COVID hit, a lot of us felt like we were experiencing 2005 again. There was this anxiety around, could I teach on Zoom? Could I, be as effective? Am I being devalued as an instructor because while I'm content knowledge rich, I'm not technology ready? And so what I think a lot of these opportunities do, Susan, is they just say things like, hey, we can do like Great Hearts did and simply offer to the far right of this graphic a new course that's flexible. And we can take our private instructor who's most tech savvy and just try that as an offering. We don't have to go to scale tomorrow. And then if that's successful, we can build up a little cadre of teachers who might serve at a regional center or be interested in standing up a micro school. So you can totally protect the core of the organization while you're also building for the future. I just think that as more and more parents come through your hallways, physical and virtual, their expectations are going to shift. So I think it's always good to have an R&D strategy, right? Like every year, we're going to get a little bit stronger in digital transformation. And whether that budget is 10,000 or 10 million, starting is the key, trying to figure out how can we incrementally improve each year to get to that future state.
Bryan, I really love that. I'm putting this in here now. Really love the idea of an R&D strategy, because I think when you put it that way, businesses always have a budget and have continuous learning. Having the concept or the idea of looking for a research and development or a design strategy, I can think back to it being in the early days of school improvement, really every year analyzing where we are, looking at what we have and our resources and so on, and really thinking, where do we want to be? That can come under that. And so as accreditors, as we start to think about, what does that mean? What is an R&D strategy for schools, right? Anybody else have thoughts on that? I'm going to start calling names. Ahmad or James, any of you with thoughts or questions. I don't want to be the teacher picking on the kids in the back of the room, you know. And we did hear back from David. He has experienced an outage in his area.
Go ahead,
Check.
James. Go ahead, James.
No, I think this is good. I missed part of it because I had a parent come in. It's really the challenge for our association, because again, we're one of those small associations, is communicating this with our schools. We're having a lot of schools that are kind of like you were saying earlier, they're in this cycle of long-term planning and not that cycle of let's spend 30 days and really dig into what we're talking about. What do we need to know so that we know how to move forward? And we're starting to integrate all these things that we started doing during COVID because we had to. We found that there was some positive things about that. And so we're kind of caught between these two models instead of realizing that they are in fact two completely separate models. And we need to treat them as two separate models if we're going to be effective as we use both of those sets of tools. We probably should be using both of those sets of tools, but we have to recognize that they are not the same thing. It's not the same training. It's not the same implementation. It's not the same evaluation. And so there's a lot of gaps to fill, and we're seeing it as we're back doing these school inspections. We're seeing they're keeping some pieces and parts, but they haven't necessarily integrated that into their overall strategy as a school. So some of our administrations don't really have control of all these pieces and parts. So these are good conversations that will help us kind of focus our schools in on what the conversations they need to be having. So
I appreciate those comments. A couple of reactions, James. Outside of digital transformation, one of the areas that I've probably spent, 10,000 hours plus in is what most people would call strategic planning. And it's my belief that the strategic plan is dead, that basically where we are in the modern world is month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year. So you can have a 3-year strategic plan, but the reality is you need to be thinking about metrics once a month, once a quarter, making changes, that type of deal. So we switched a couple years ago to this notion of a strategic positioning platform to give organizations who were in school improvement planning or school improvement sessions a bearing point no matter where they were, right? And so they knew what was going well, they knew what was challenging, they knew what was seriously ill. Most American schools have gone to some version of professional learning communities, communities of practice, network improvement communities, but even those are often misused. There's a lot of them, a lot about them I like, but you also have to train the norms. You also have to make sure people actually do it. So one of the things we've been talking about with busy associations and busy schools is start with a design retreat, start with a design day, learn a little bit about what's possible, look at some options in your context, and then just commit to coming together once a month for a lunch and learn, something small, and say that our objective over the next 90 days is to learn and ask and inquire, and then have someone put that together for you in a way that's okay. Are we checking for understanding, and are we ready to make these next steps? Because these folks are so head down, as you know, with everything they've got to do, that just creating space to dream or to think about design is a challenge. So in our work, we find let's use a structure they have. They might have a release day. They might have some way to come together with the frequency so that those questions can be asked. And whether they do it, a partner does it, there's all kinds of permutations of that. But I hear that loud and clear. And we just try to start with a really smart change strategy, which is let's just all commit to learning for 90 days.
Yeah, James, thanks for sharing on that, because I think the idea, if we think about it, all of us are in the same, most of our schools, and many schools anyway, that are in the same position. We threw things out there for during COVID because they were necessities, right? And then we had purchased all these things. We bought all these tools. Some people liked what they were doing. And so we don't want to drop it. And in reality, most of the schools never want to be caught without that backup system, which is how most people perceived it, right? So we're going to continue. We spent all this money. We're going to continue, but we never at any point thought that these two things could merge, or that we would improve upon what we actually were doing as we built out whole new models. It's we stuck this new thing on top of the old model, or we forced it into that box, right? And in reality, as Bryan has indicated, we really now need to go back and look at these two completely different delivery models, or these two ways to learn, these two systems. So, great conversations, and these kinds of conversations, James, like you said, really will help us in helping guide our schools and do some more understanding. So Bryan, has anybody else any questions for Bryan? I did promise him I would let him go by 2:15, so I'm down to the last couple of minutes. And then we have one more topic for today. Bryan had hit on some conversations about bandwidth and so on, and we do have an expert who's been working with the FCC and other ministries and so on around the world. Bryan, I'll send you the recording so you can actually catch up on what Roger's going to speak about as well. And I think that'll be really interesting for everyone else and your tech people. But any other questions for Bryan at this point? Okay, so I will do the follow-up, make sure that you have all the resources. You'll get everything that you need that Bryan has already shared with our team. And, we'll make this available to all of you. Oh, Bryan has popped up his Forever Young photograph. Bryan, love it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for sharing with us today.
You bet. Nice to meet everyone. Best of luck and go USA. See you.
See you. Thanks. So at this point then, Roger, are you with us, or did you run off and watch the game? I know England's playing.
I'm definitely here, and I've been listening very carefully to see what Bryan was talking about. Very interesting.
All right. Well, we're gonna. Does everybody need a break for 5 minutes, or are we ready to start with Roger? Would we like a break? Are we good? All right. So we're going to go ahead and start with Roger. And Roger, some of the topics that Bryan touched on were things like bandwidth and, some of the things like cybersecurity and the use of resources. No one on the call is particularly techie. We're not the IT directors, but we do need this information so that we know how to look for things, how to question, and then, of course, the feedback will be, do we want more in-depth workshops to be able to help our heads of schools and to be able to help our IT directors in those buildings or in those networks of schools to understand. So all yours, and thank you so much. I'm going to mute.
Thank you very much. Let's get my deck up on the screen. I think that's working. Yeah, it was very interesting listening to what Bryan was saying. Strategic, big picture, big contrast to what I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to zoom right in to a very small piece of what our CEO calls the plumbing down in the boiler room of a school. But I'm not going to talk tech, and in fact, I'm not going to talk about that bit of plumbing. I'm going to be focused on how it's applicable. How, rather than how it works, why it matters, what it affects, why you should care and not leave it to the techs. And also, I guess, probably my big takeaway, why you should do something about it now rather than later. So let's see if I've got slides moving ahead. Yes, fantastic, I have. So I'm delighted to be able to connect with you all today from a very cold and grey England. And I'm excited to share with you our insights into how schools are fixing the connectivity problem with a simple, low-cost approach and what difference it makes. It's got far-reaching consequences across the whole gamut of digital transformation activities for both educators and administrators, and ultimately for students, for both rural and urban schools, in public and private sectors, in the West and in the developing world. For more than a decade, school districts in the know across the US have been benefiting from a low-cost network technology that makes e-learning work better and saves money into the bargain. And it's now federally funded. Steve Cole at Woodland was implementing Compass Learning's Discovery Suite in 2010. And he didn't have enough internet capacity to make it work. But the solution that he found saved 86% of his bandwidth use for that platform. Winfield in Missouri doubled their bandwidth in 2014, but were disappointed to find that content didn't get any quicker at all. Then they discovered the missing ingredient. And Dave Dobbins at Cascade in Montana stumbled across that same missing ingredient in the same year. Teachers had been reluctant to use the district's 20 megabit per second internet connection because it was unreliable, but not anymore. In just a few years, the district raced ahead of their neighbours in terms of e-learning adoption and practice. Teachers embraced it because it worked. Anaheim Union have had a solution of this sort for 6 years. It saves around half their bandwidth consumption, and classroom content is 40 times faster. They got a 20 gig internet connection. And even on a connection of that size, content comes from the internet at a fraction of the speed that you'd expect with the levels of investment in infrastructure that they've made. And to keep up with post-pandemic levels of in-school e-learning, Chicago Public Schools had in front of them a network upgrade project stretching out more than 5 years. In 2022, they deployed the federally funded solution in every school across the district in just 2 months over the summer break. Around the world, ministries of education are relearning what we got to grips with here in the UK in 2003. In Ecuador, the Ministry of Education is transforming the life opportunities of school children in remote regions with a tiny internet connection that delivers, with this technology, huge quantities of online content. In Senegal, the World Bank and the Ministry of Education are making online video accessible for whole class e-learning with just a 4G modem. This is a life-changing project. The Senegalese teachers have made a fantastic 7-minute video about the transformation that was accomplished in just 2 weeks with a 30-minute intervention. I'll send you a link to that wonderful video. It's in French, but it has English subtitles if you watch it on YouTube. And it sums up what the teachers and the students get out of this kind of transformative e-learning. Since 2001, we at Appliances have studied the data from installations that now span 160 countries. It's the same story wherever you are. So what is this secret sauce and why is it secret? For the last 20 years then, we've been analysing the recipe for effective connectivity for schools. We've looked at what works and what doesn't work. The data is clear. If we get connectivity right, it underpins all the UNESCO digital transformation pillars. We've mapped how all schools, in all school systems everywhere, work to move along an e-learning journey, progressing each of these different pillars in parallel. It's a long and difficult task. When you get connectivity right, it can accelerate all the other activities. But
Roger, I'm going to interrupt you for a second because I want to stop right for 1 second. and make sure that everyone understands the value of the chart you have here, because not everyone here, since we're not all techie, not everyone here even knows that this digital transformation path chart really is something that will help them in understanding and planning for the schools, and helping their schools to plan. So resources like this, do we have policies around pedagogy on our digital transformation path? Do we have resources, or do we have knowledge and plans around content, around the devices? Because, Bryan talked about, having these technical skills and having the high picture, the vision, but there are all these other factors that go into technology and digital planning. And then I have one question for you, which I popped into the session here, and I think it's important that everyone has this knowledge. Does bandwidth impact my schools in the US? Is this something I should be, connectivity, is this something I should be worried about in the US? Or is it just something for my international schools? Because many of the groups here as accreditors have schools in the US and then have schools in developing countries. So I want to make sure we're really clear that this is something of value also in the US, not just for us to be considering for our internationals.
Fantastic question.
Sorry, because I am getting some private questions. That's why I'm asking. They're not popping up. I'm getting these questions privately.
Great. Thanks very much for that. Absolutely. I will be showing you how the US has tackled this, what the FCC's done to make this technology available for all schools in the country through the E-rate and the ESSA programs. I think the problems are different in different stages of this e-learning journey. So if you are in a developing world, or you've got a private school in a rural part of Africa or Southeast Asia, then you will have a different set of challenges, but this technology makes a difference all the way along the path. When you're at this place that Anaheim Union is at today, fantastic connectivity, wonderful infrastructure, and yet they want to do more than they currently can. And the stuff that's coming from the internet is slow, regardless of the size of their internet. So there's a bunch of things that getting connectivity right does for Anaheim, and there's a bunch of things that getting connectivity right does from the school in Senegal. And they are quite different, and I am straddling both those worlds in this conversation, and that is a little bit different from my normal role. When I go to talk to a Ministry of Education on an African trip, and I'm visiting Kigali and I'm talking to the ministry there, we're very focused on the left-hand end of this e-learning journey. When I'm speaking to Palm Beach County, who can't update their Chromebooks in an appropriate period of time, I'm over at the right-hand end. But this technology is the bit that is going to make the difference regardless of where you are. Because connectivity makes a difference right across the spectrum. And it was interesting listening to Bryan and the points that he was raising. There is so much to do. And my top tip from, Trina introduced me as a technical person. I wasn't technical before I spent 12 years analyzing the traffic that goes through schools' networks. I mean, it's a pretty geeky thing to do. And I've turned into a little bit of a data kind of geek. I admit it. But the top tip from all that work, which I've done on your behalf, I've put my hand in the fire. The top tip from me is you need to get connectivity right at the beginning. You need to do this at the start. You don't wait till you've got problems later, because they'll happen very quickly. Actually, getting connectivity right needs to happen at the very beginning, because even if you're thinking about pedagogy, if you're thinking about content, if you're thinking about capacity building, which at the 2 conferences we've just been to in Africa was the top thing. If you get connectivity right, all those things become easier. If you don't have connectivity right, they're much harder. So that's, I guess, I have a separate lecture, workshop, which I will send a recording to in the notes here, which is aimed at the educators and the policymakers about where this connectivity piece fits in just for them. And I'm not going to talk on the technical side today, and I'm not going to talk exclusively on theirs. I'm going to just straddle the whole thing and give everybody a picture.
Roger, there's one more question coming in, and it's a couple of people are, I guess not everybody's going to speak up because they know that we're recording this, but I do have a question coming in, and it says, is it not enough just to say I have internet? What does this mean, getting it right? What most basic level, what does it mean to say getting connectivity? How do I see that in the classroom? How do I see that with my teachers? What do you mean get connectivity right?
So I am going to hopefully cover that in this short talk.
All right.
The key thing is it's about effective access. Connectivity is not about bandwidth. That's just like having how many lanes have you got on your road? And we'll talk about that later. It doesn't mean because you've got lots of lanes on your road that your cars can travel fast, because they might be tuk-tuks or pizza delivery guys or tankers or even great big oil tankers that are supposed to be at sea but happen to be on your road. So I will hopefully cover that one, and it's a great question. Some of you will be familiar with Dr. Ruben Puertendura's SAMA model, which encapsulates how the real value of e-learning, the most transformative capabilities, are not just replacing textbooks with digital textbooks, but they're about incorporating interactivity. Higher up the model, it's about video that frees up the teacher from the shackles of content delivery, which is wonderfully captured by the teachers in Senegal in that video. And learning metrics and adaptive platforms that empower teachers. The challenge here that we've got, and this answers part of the question you were just asking, Trina, student-centered independent access to digital platforms is the key to 21st century skills. So this is independent learning, 40 students in a lab, in a class, all using their own device to drive their own learning with the teacher as facilitator. But this needs 40 times more bandwidth than if the teacher presents the same material from the front of the class. So now what we're saying is, this effective capacity, is connection enough? No. It's what you want to do with the connectivity that matters. And if you want to have independent learning and you want to have learning metrics, because they are the really transformative capabilities, then you need 40 times more bandwidth than teaching from the front of the class with the same content. And offline learning doesn't hit the spot because you need those learning metrics, as you can see over on the left here. You need those learning metrics not just to empower the teacher, but for effective monitoring and evaluation, so that education authorities can target their interventions. I sat over lunch with the Minister of Education from Uganda when I was at a conference, and I said to him, what is your top priority? He said M&E. It has to be M&E. Monitoring and evaluation has to be my top priority because there is no school system in the world that has too much money. And Ugandan school system is one of those that doesn't have too much money. So I have to target my intervention. How can I target my interventions without metrics? And I thought that really brought it home to me. I'm not an educator like you, Trina. I'm coming to this from a completely different direction, but I'm learning about this little piece of plumbing and what it'll do and what matters, what it results in mattering in the classroom. Interestingly, those ministries of education that I work with who embraced offline digital solutions just 3 years ago, met us at the Education World Forum, where we're a sponsor, and came to our stand where all these folks are selling fantastic content and assessment platforms. We're the only people there who are talking about how do you get to use those things in your remote schools. And they embraced offline working because, as we're about to see, connectivity is problematic. But today, since the pandemic, all of them are now clear that offline working is a very poor compromise. So.
I'm getting a question. I'm sorry, Roger. What's the difference between online working and offline working? And, can you define that? Because these are new terms to some people on the call. Just very quickly.
So if you are connecting with an online platform, I'm doing a pilot right now with the Ecuador schools, the Ministry of Education there, with an award-winning English language platform, which is called Little Bridge. and it's got fantastic AI up in the cloud. You wouldn't want to build a massive server in every school to be able to handle that kind of metrics and all the kind of dynamic assessment of how students are doing with this conversational English which they're learning. So all that happens up in the cloud. It's all done for you, but you need to be able to connect to that cloud to make it happen. So that's an online platform where being online really matters. When you go to YouTube, the connection is to a YouTube server in the internet somewhere in the cloud. If you download a YouTube video onto your laptop and then watch it on your laptop, you're now watching it offline. There's no metrics going upstream to any kind of servers upstream. There's no intelligence that's being harvested by people to see what's your level of engagement and how far through the course are you. So the difference between online and offline is that the online bit has this ability to connect to bigger systems and more intelligence and is more responsive and more adaptive, whereas the offline is great because you don't need an internet connection, but you get none of that transformative capability that you get with those more advanced systems that inevitably are going to have the economies of scale when they're in the cloud.
Thank you.
So you need connectivity, but connectivity is problematic. It's connectivity for schools has got some very specific challenges, which I'm going to touch on in a non-tech way with you now. Some very specific challenges that threaten equity, return on investment, and sustainability. Collectively, they make the connectivity problem for schools. And it applies to wealthy urban America, to the townships of Johannesburg, where we have a project running right now, and to all the rural communities in the world. We're doing some fantastic work in Alaska, where we're saving literally millions of dollars in individual schools on the bandwidth because we're using what they have more efficiently. There are three key aspects to the connectivity problem. And the first of them is clear, and it's widely acknowledged: bandwidth isn't equitably distributed or equitably priced. And there's a key, this one part, the first part of these three on the screen, this one part is the key reason why our understanding of what we mean by connectivity has got to change if we're going to bridge the digital gap. Before we look at the other two, the ever increasing costs and the remarkably poor ROI that schools get from bandwidth, let's just take a look at the implications of that digital divide for schools beyond the US shores, but in that also it applies to rural Texas and Alaska as well. This on the screen is the national 10-year plan for the rollout of connectivity in the Latin American country of Chile, with online video available towards the end of that decade. So in terms of Dr. Puertendura's SAMA model, Chilean schools, like so many around the world, will labor for years in the Sama foothills. Meanwhile, their Senegalese colleagues who cracked this connectivity problem are leaping ahead. Basically, if there's a reliance on bandwidth alone to deliver connectivity, then low bandwidth nations, as well as schools in low bandwidth areas of otherwise wealthy nations, are condemned to the slow lane. So that's the rural bit, economically disadvantaged in the townships in Johannesburg. The second part is that as schools progress along this e-learning journey, they're going to need to do more e-learning each year with more video in more lessons. So there are more student devices. I was just talking to a school district just before I came into this call in San Antonio in Texas. They bought 16,000 more Chromebooks during the pandemic. So you've got more student devices, and the software updates that keep those devices running and safe consume more and more of your precious bandwidth. Between the start and finish of the pandemic, so this is just looking at the US, between the start and finish of the pandemic, US school districts recorded as much as 3 times more bandwidth consumption per day than they had just 2 years previously. 3 times. That's a massive hike in the kind of bandwidth that you need. And the FCC data that we work with the FCC on shows that actually on average, school districts added 17% per year to their bandwidth over that period. So what this means is that for decades, schools go through a cycle of frustration. Teachers are frustrated, like the teachers in Cascade in Montana. They can't do what they want to do. Then they get a bandwidth upgrade. And then they get frustrated again because they're doing more and they quickly consume the new bit of bandwidth that they've got. This is a cycle that the FCC recognized as unsustainable in 2014. But the toughest aspect of the connectivity problem for schools, particularly for the remote schools, but this applies across Anaheim Union and Chicago as well, is how schools use what precious internet connection they have. Just think about the teaching and learning process. The school in the UK, down in the southwest, a rural part of the UK that I have been a director at on the school board for the last few years, spends quite a lot of time coaching teachers in how to get lessons off to a good start, to build lesson momentum. So it's not a surprise when you look at that graph bottom right, that schools have a very different traffic profile from what you might see in an ISP, where all the ISP's customers have got a fairly randomized browsing pattern. In a school, you have orchestrated browsing with the teacher saying, right, everybody, let's open that video, ebook, PDF, all at the same time. So these spikes, not only do they all consume a huge amount of bandwidth at the same moment, right across the school, orchestrated by the school bell, but they're made up of the same content being fetched over and over. It's a dreadfully inefficient use of the internet pipe. So on the surface, there's your dilemma. You either pay for ever-increasing spikes in demand, or you get congestion and teachers can't do what they want to do and they get frustrated and they revert to old school teaching and learning. And whatever bandwidth you have, you're using it inefficiently because that's what the teaching and learning process does. Don't worry, there's an answer. But before we get to the answer, we just need to understand the urgency here. Public and private school systems around the world have been making the same mistakes on connectivity for more than 20 years. The pandemic has multiplied the urgency of fixing that problem. And as we've seen with 3 times more bandwidth consumption going on in US schools, we need to sort it out now. In some ways, the world has changed for the better. For sure, there's no going back. We need to make sure that blended learning works. But austerity is coming. Emergency funding for connectivity and other schools' infrastructure is due to be cut back. LAUSD has recently published a big report explaining how worried they are about the near to midterm future of funding because of this huge increase in demand that they've got now that teachers have got to grips with what e-learning is all about and have accelerated their e-learning adoption. There's increased risk around the world, clearly in other parts of the world in particular, of being left behind. And that's because the sole solution focus has been on unsustainable increases to inequitably distributed resource. I visited Rwanda in 2018 before the pandemic, and the Rwandans were delighted to tell me that they'd now got fiber to 220 of their schools. I said, that's wonderful. Fiber is great because it's scalable, but it's not scalable for free. You know, what have you got today? They said 5 megabits per second. Now, without getting too technical, 5 megabits per second is about as much as it takes for 3 people to watch YouTube. It's not whole class e-learning. By the time I spoke to them in 2019 on my next visit there, they were disappointed with their 5 meg. They needed 10 meg. They were telling the schools, we can't afford 10 meg. It's $500 per school per month to go from 5 meg to 10 meg. And they told the school, you'll have to get the parents to pay because we haven't got that money. So bandwidth alone is not sustainable, but we can make a fundamental shift for the many, not just the few, and we need to do it now. So this is the answer. What we need to do is make more efficient use of the internet connections that you have in your schools. The solution was devised back when the internet was conceived, right? That's older than me and Trina. If you were going to watch, if you were going to watch a YouTube video in the classroom in Senegal, it was never intended that you would fetch it from the Google HQ in Silicon Valley. There would be caches of popular content stored across the world. Google has got 2 million of these today, just for their own content. It's a kind of, look after yourself kind of situation. And they consume as much electricity, by the way, as a medium-sized country. The secret sauce is to use the same technology as Google is doing to make money in the school, in the last mile. And that's what Chicago, Anaheim, Cascade in Montana, Ecuador, and Senegal Ministries of Education, that's what they're doing. They're putting a small, low-cost computer appliance inside each school building, performing advanced, schools-focused web caching. Web caching is the name of this technology, and a bunch of other network efficiency technologies all wrapped up together. That's what they're doing. This has been a neglected technology in most schools for a decade or more. And now, well, is it a game changer or is it fundamentally essential? Depends on your perspective. This is the really good news. It works unbelievably well in schools. There are 2 graphs here taken from an 8 megabits per second school. That's a tiny internet connection in Missouri. Raymore Peculiar. I think it's a wonderful name for a school. Raymore Peculiar, we took these 2 graphs. The left-hand one shows what proportion of what students are asking for in those big spikes in demand has already been asked for by somebody else. What proportion is repeat requests? There you can see those spikes are 70, 80, 90% the same content being fetched by lots of people. Now, that means if you can fetch it once and then share it to the whole school, that's going to make a big difference. And there you can see the difference over on the right. The blue spikes at the top is how much is being delivered to the students. The green at the bottom is what proportion of that actually needed to come from the internet, the learning metrics, fetching the content for the first time. It's tiny. We're serving 70 megabits per second of content in this classroom in Raymore Peculiar, and we're only fetching 3, 4, 5, 6 megabits per second of that from the internet. In Alaska, Latin America, Africa, we're saving 95% of the bandwidth that it takes to access online learning platforms like Little Bridge and the national content platform in Ecuador. And as we've seen, when you do serve something from this cached copy, this little copy that you've fetched once and you're now serving it from inside the school, it's radically faster. It's 40 times faster at Anaheim on their 20 gigabit per second internet connection, a massive internet pipe. And yet it's 40 times faster in one of the most metropolitan districts on the planet. So the FCC saw that doubling bandwidth every year doesn't make sense in 2014 and said, we're going to give money to all schools to be able to do this. And money has been available for all schools. They realized that bandwidth capacity targets don't work. It doesn't matter how much bandwidth you throw at the problem. And I guess for non-technical people in the room, the question is why? Why can't you just throw bandwidth at it? Why can't you double Anaheim's capacity from 20 gig to 40 gig? And I guess it's like building out the highway between Washington, DC and Dulles International Airport, which is the biggest road I've ever driven on. It's like building that road out to be 20 lanes in each direction rather than 12. It doesn't make every truck and school bus as fast as a Lamborghini. And you have eye-watering levels of unused concrete other than at rush hour. So what matters for schools is effective connectivity. Effective connectivity is how much you have, the capacity. It's a function of that times efficiency. It's what you have times how efficiently you use it. And this technology is all about the efficiency bit. Schools typically start out with a little internet connection, and then they get frustrated when the teachers try to use it, So they build out more capacity, rinse and repeat. But in a class of 40 students, caching can multiply the available bandwidth by 40. It doesn't double it, it multiplies it by 40. So we're working with the FCC now to reverse the unintended consequences of over the last 5-10 years, focusing on SETDA's bandwidth targets. And our latest annual report for the FCC is now available on the FCC website, and we're going to be providing you a link to that in the course notes. In the last decade, additional capabilities have been developed to help schools who've got very low or intermittent connections. And one of those innovations, particularly useful in Latin America or Africa, but also one of these innovations has been adopted by urban schools in the US. And what it does is it provides safe, sanitized YouTube access. It's a teacher-led video portal, and it was mastered in double quick time by those e-learning reluctant teachers in Senegal. On the left is native YouTube. You'll recognize the long list of associated links and the comment thread that every teacher will tell you are distractions to at least somebody in every class. On the right is the library video, safe, sanitized, no distractions. The teacher just sees the video she wants, clicks on a little extension in the browser, and it fetches it into the school to be stored safely in the place that she wants to keep it. This kind of functionality, a teacher-led video portal, connecting with the caching technology, which makes connectivity more efficient, means that teachers can collaborate with each other inside the school and with neighboring schools. And central content teams can push out new resources, maybe overnight, while the internet connection is quiet. So these network efficiency technologies are kind of hybrid. They're web caching, which has been around since the dawn of the internet, and there are a bunch of new things that are being developed to meet the needs, the evolving needs of schools. So these advanced schools-focused technologies are tried and tested, but largely neglected. The FCC is trying to shift more schools to follow the lead of CPS and get more bang for the E-rate buck. And around the world, school systems need to wake up to the cost of keeping doing what we're doing. So this technology transforms classroom internet performance, laying an equitable foundation for ICT-enabled independent learning. It pays for itself fast and goes on year to save money that can be redirected to other educational priorities. We have a fantastic testimonial from the Minister of State from the Maldives, who put one of these devices into all the schools across the Maldives, saying that actually they ended up spending only a third of the internet budget they thought they were going to have to spend, and they could redirect that money to other things.
Roger, I'm going to interrupt you. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
sorry.
No.
I'm so sorry. I thought that slide was finished.
I'm
going to apologize. Yeah, I have comments. I'm seeing some more comments coming in, and so one of our organizations is already saying that they want more head of school and IT director training in this area, and I'll connect you after this. But Roseanne, I think you're saying that you're seeing, and I hope I didn't throw you under the bus calling you here, but you're seeing slow internet and lack of bandwidth actually becoming huge issues at some of your schools. So I don't know, Suzanne, if you want to, or Roseanne, sorry, if you want to ask questions or comment on it now, or if any of the rest of you are seeing these issues or hearing these in your conversations. You know, are these topics, are these things that your IT directors are talking about, or your heads of school are talking about? Because I know that we're scheduled to stop hard at 3 o'clock. And by the way, it's still 0-0 in the football game. So we're in the soccer. So nobody need worry. We're at 0-0.
Actually, it's 1-0.
Is it?
US.
Oh, wow. Sorry, I'm looking at Wales and England. Sorry, I wasn't watching the right match. Sorry, I'm on the wrong game. I'm seeing the scores flashing up here on the screen. So Roseanne, any comments or questions? I mean, this has just been so interesting because I think we all know how to clear, do the caching we think of on our own laptops or on our computers, but this is a totally different conversation. And, looking at these efficiencies, layer in efficiencies, and really improving connectivity in order to improve what teachers can do in the classroom is just such a, just like Roger said, such an under considered, or something that people just haven't thought about, or they don't really address. We think about slamming more resources and slamming more things on top. We're not really getting to the root of these issues. Any comments or anything else? And then I'll let Roger go on. Roger, I'm going to limit you now to 5 minutes and then take some questions. Do we have anything from anybody?
So
No.
I'm close to wrapping up, and
Okay,
actually,
great. Yeah.
this next part is the kind of message for the CTOs in your organizations. And the question is, why is this a secret sauce? Why isn't this being used across your school's networks? And we've identified 3 reasons. Over the last decade in particular, the internet has become increasingly complex, fragmented, even unruly. Techs who knew and understood web caching back in the day see that web caching is increasingly ineffectual for the ISPs who originally profited from it. The caching vendors who built caches for ISPs have one by one moved away, leaving schools behind, as Cisco did to CPS when they withdrew from the market and end-of-lifed CPS's fleet of Cisco caching servers. In addition, industry standard network monitoring equipment, the stuff that you use to see what's going on in your network, was designed for ISPs. And in schools, it doesn't show the speed of objects coming from the internet. It doesn't show those start of lesson peaks that I showed you, that teachers know disrupts teaching and learning, but technology directors and their technical admin teams will tell you, no, we don't have any problems. Teachers tell us when we do our surveys at ISTE that actually there are problems every day, every week, every month. But the visibility isn't there because the technology has not been designed for schools. So network managers don't have visibility of these critical elements of schools' traffic profiles. The secret sauce is that this technology still works. It works exceptionally well for schools. And there are schools-focused caching appliances available and proven across K-12 and in pockets around the world. So what sort of solution do you need? Schools everywhere have tight budgets, so they need great ROI, and web caching is a low-cost technology. It's nothing like the cost of a firewall or a filter. It delivers impressive savings. Large urban schools need a dedicated schools-focused device that is easy to use. Interestingly, Chicago is one of those very large school districts who is expert in caching. There aren't very many of them. They've had caches right up to the present day. And they looked for a solution when Cisco caches went end of life, and they said, oh, that's that solution, the cache box, that's exactly what we want. If we were designing a cache from scratch, that's it. So I think that's a really important reference, that actually technology for schools is out there. Remote schools need a different kind of solution. They need something that can be centrally managed, is unbelievably simple and easy to use, that teachers can get to grips with really fast. They may also, remote schools, benefit from what we call a network in a box, everything you need in one easy to deploy, easy to manage device. Maybe it's got a firewall and a filter all built in, integrated. So they might need something different. And that's one of the areas that I spend my time working with the educational authorities and large school systems to help them decide what you need where and how does it all fit together. A bit like Bryan's consultancy, it's about going to fundamentals and thinking, actually, what do you need and how's it going to work best? And in fact, I've got a vendor neutral white paper for your CTO that looks at the nature of large distributed schools organizations and how those characteristics of those large schools organizations and distributed networks, how those characteristics inform the kind of caching that you need. So it's a completely vendor neutral piece that just looks at the logic of schools are like this, so you need caches that are like that.
Roger,
And there's
I'm
a
gonna stop. Oh, sorry.
That's it.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I was
I've
gonna
got
say, we've got a bunch of things here which are available for everybody afterwards.
terrific. Thank you so much. There's a great question that just popped up for everyone. It says, and so I need you to clarify and really describe if this is an accurate assessment or not. So if I understand the web caching, it acts like a mini server for schools or even the school districts. The schools select what resources are universal usage. This helps to get teacher and students directed to exactly the content they're looking for. Does it do that, or does it do more?
Yes, both. I think in a very large school district like Anaheim, the main purpose of the cache is dynamic and transparent. So a teacher says to a student, I want you to go to this, or to a class, I want you to go to this resource. The first student to go to it, their request goes through the cache, and the cache says, oh, I'll get that for you, and it fetches it. And when the second person requests it, the cache says, oh, I've already got that, here you are, I'm going to serve it locally to you. So it's happening in real time. In the situation that we're in Ecuador, where there's a tiny internet connection, you couldn't even ask the first person to go and fetch a video from YouTube because there isn't enough bandwidth to play it. So what we do there is we populate the cache overnight. We're fetching all the content overnight, and we're only using the internet connection itself for the learning metrics, the authentication, logging in, and the learning progress data and the engagement metrics and so on. Those tiny little bits of data which go up and down to the central servers on the internet. So it's a different situation there. And then there's a bunch of other technologies that schools really benefit from, like the teacher-led portal, where a teacher can actually say, oh, I want to keep that video, or I've made my own video. I was talking to a teacher just the other day in Iowa, who's completely flipped. She's just doing everything since the pandemic. She's got to grips with recording class content, giving it to students to study at home, and then doing exercises on things during the lesson rather than the other way around. And making those videos has become a norm for her. Every lesson she's creating her own video. And the normal thing to do would be to post that video to YouTube, right? So you're putting it on the internet, and then to have every student go and fetch it back from the internet. So 40 students then fetch it back into the school. Doesn't make sense. Makes a lot more sense to post the video locally into the media library inside the cache, in the device inside the cache, inside the school, and then have the students fetch it from there. Don't use the internet connection for things you don't need to use it for. And that frees things up for things like online testing. The folks in San Antonio we were speaking today, the main challenge for I think for most school districts in Texas at the moment with testing, it's now mandatory. They haven't really got everything nailed, just like you were describing, all these different things you're trying to get right in the online and the bricks and mortar schools. Online testing is a big challenge. If you get the connectivity bit sorted, and there are some very, Pearson, we've been working with Pearson since 2003. I think they put 2,000 of their caches into UK schools with their content on. They're really cache savvy. They know what it's all about. They're one of few really good vendors that understand what caching is about. And it makes an unbelievable difference. There's going to be 2,500 students doing online testing at Judson in San Antonio, 2,500 students at the same time. That's a bit of a worry. And as a result, what school districts do is they stagger their testing window. It's so that the teachers have 2 weeks of stress instead of one. And okay, you've got half as much bandwidth being used, but wouldn't it be great to get it all over in one go without the worry? And that's where caching comes in. The short answer to the question is yes, absolutely, it does what you just described. And the long answer is it does a bit more too.
Thank you so much. And thanks to, thanks for everybody for staying on and participating. The comments I'm getting back are just great, getting a lot of individual comments and a lot of individual questions and feedback. Roger, everybody has found this really, really informative. And I'm hoping you actually come back to tomorrow's session, even though you're not presenting tomorrow, because I have a number of questions here and a number of people. I'm going to, and any other questions directly for Roger's point? Anybody can unmute themselves for the last couple of minutes? I just got a flash that said my internet connection is unstable in the hotel. Sorry. Clay, I'm going to throw it over to you to close out, and we will see everybody at the same time tomorrow. I hope this was informative. I hope you got what you need. And Clay, up to you.
Great. Appreciate everybody showing up today. I think it's been fantastic. It's been a learning experience from day one. And so I look forward to tomorrow's meetings and future meetings. We'll see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
Everyone. Thank you. Yep. Bye-bye.
1 o'clock.
Bye, everybody.
Oh, 10 o'clock Pacific time.
1 o'clock for you, 6 o'clock for me. All right. Take care,
Exactly.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Exactly. And Roger.
Thank you.
Thank you.